I'm Karen McMahon with Pig Health Today, and I'm visiting with Laura Bruner, a veterinarian at Swine Vet Center in St. Peter, Minnesota. Laura, you've been doing quite a bit of work with mycoplasma-negative, and more recently, it's been with eradication efforts. Can you tell me about the success you've had with eradication efforts and how you maintain them?
Yeah, so within our clinic, we've probably eradicated mycoplasma in close to 200,000 sows. And so mycoplasma-negative is a very significant pathogen to pigs, and so if we can eliminate it, we like to. And then once we eliminate it, it's really important that we try and keep it out, because a negative herd, it can be very devastating if they're negative and mycoplasma introduces into the herd. And so the most common entry is usually gilt introduction. Mycoplasma can enter through the air. It's a less frequent event. It's not as common as PRRS introductions, but can happen. And so what we focus on is, once we get a herd negative, how do we keep it out?
Why don't you tell me about your surveillance monitoring efforts in the herds that are negative?
Sure. So most commonly, we'll have sow farms that enter in gilts either as 50-pound pigs, feeder pigs, or as select animals, so around 200, 280 pounds. And so it's really important that those animals coming in are negative. Historically, we've done a lot of serology to test and see if gilts are negative for mycoplasma. And what we found out over time, as the testing has gotten better, is that that's really 6 weeks behind the infection. And so if I bring animals into my herd and I'm testing for mycoplasma and I do serology, there's a good chance that I'm going to miss a really acute infection or a recent infection. And so what we've done more commonly now is laryngeal swabs. And so that's basically testing animals, usually commonly 30 gilts before entry into the sow herd, and we do mycoplasma PCR. So we're looking for the actual bacteria in the gilts. It looks like the laryngeal swabs or the deep tracheal swabs are where the industry is kind of going for mycoplasma.
Did you have some, you said the serum has been widely used, and but you've learned now that's like 6 weeks behind. Have you had some bad experiences with that, or?
Yeah, I think historically we didn't understand mycoplasma as well, because that's really all we had. We had the serology, and so after the fact, when sow farms would break with mycoplasma, you'd go back to the serology and say, well, they were negative. But in hindsight, we probably missed a lot of acute infections relying on the serology. And so the PCR and doing the laryngeal swabs has been awesome. We've been able to kind of real-time test for mycoplasma, where historically we have not been able to. The serology, we're really looking at antibodies, and if you look at, say, like a PRRS virus, usually the animal develops antibodies within 7 to 10 days post-infection. And so mycoplasma is a little bit unique in that we don't start seeing antibodies in the serum until somewhere 4 to 6 weeks post-infection. And so, knowing that information, we knew that we had to find other alternatives to try and find an acute infection. And so the laryngeal swabs, we test for mycoplasma PCR, so we're actually looking for the actual bacteria versus the response, like the serology does.
The laryngeal swab, can you explain that, what that is?
We use a speculum to open the mouth of the animal, and then we actually use a long spoon that we go back into the larynx of the mouth, because that's where, think about it, if an animal coughs, you're going to have a lot of saliva that builds up back there. And so all we're doing is going closer to the respiratory tract and pulling out the saliva that we can actually test for the bacteria. Ropes have been used in the past for mycoplasma, but the sensitivity is not very good. And so again, if you're looking for an acute infection, you're not gonna find it on the rope samples either.
Okay.
So even though that's a saliva test, it still does not pick it up as well as the actual laryngeal swabs. So we'll typically test around 30 animals. When we have a group of gilts that come in, we'll test around 30 animals, and we'll pool those into 3. So we'll get basically 10 PCRs out of a group of 30 gilts.
Okay.
And so it's a little bit of a numbers game. It depends on how many animals that you're bringing in, but that 30 has been a good statistical number for us to use.
How often do you find positives?
You know, the testing's pretty new, so we've really only been doing the laryngeal swabs on gilts going into sow farms for probably a year, maybe a year and a half. And so I've only had a suspect. I've never actually had a positive. And I think it just goes back to the aerosol infection or infection with mycoplasma is a less frequent event. And so I haven't had any positives to date, but have had some suspects. And so we basically go back into the population a week later and do 60 samples instead of the 30, and we either do the laryngeal swabs or the deep tracheal sampling.
A regular sow monitoring program? Do you ever do that for mycoplasma?
And so really what we do is more, if we hear coughing in the sow farm, that'll prompt us to test for mycoplasma. We use the same method of the laryngeal swabs, and then it's just downstream grow finish. You know, we don't routinely test for mycoplasma in downstream pigs, but if we have a cough, say early finishing or mid finishing, we'll test for mycoplasma, and if we get any positives, then we'll come back to the sow farm and do more testing.
And what's the success rate on your eradication efforts?
Yeah, so we've done eradication on close to 200,000 sows, and it's around that 80% success rate with the herd closures and medication approach.